He paid in full, dressed sharper than anyone in the lobby, stood taller than the marble pillars around him. And still, they treated him like dirt beneath their polished floors. They smiled at everyone else. They gave gifts, handshakes, upgrades. But when he stepped forward, the laughter dimmed, the service vanished, and a bellhop dropped ice at his feet like trash. Not because he raised his voice, not because he made demands, but because of his skin. Because a black man walking through a luxury hotel lobby with confidence was still, to them, a mistake that needed correcting. They ignored him, insulted him, tried to humiliate him into disappearing. What they didn't know was that they were writing their own ending, one silent moment at a time. This isn't just a story about prejudice. It's about consequences. And when they finally realized who they had dismissed, it was already too late. Stay to the end. You won't see the twist coming. If stories like this matter to you, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and what moment made your jaw drop. Thurman Foster stepped into the lobby of the Lamberton Grand with a kind of presence that demanded nothing but still drew attention. Not the kind of attention that greets a celebrity or a tycoon. This was something colder. The silence didn't fall, but it curled at the edges. Conversations softened. Fingers paused mid-type at the concierge desk. A woman in pearls lowered her magazine just enough to track his movement. It was subtle, quiet, but unmistakable. The air shifted. He wasn't one of them. His shoes were shined, his coat pressed, his stride measured, but none of it mattered. To them, he didn't fit the cutout of what this place was supposed to look like. He reached the marble counter, placed his ID and platinum reservation card gently on the desk, and spoke with calm precision. The receptionist, a young woman with shell-pink lipstick and the kind of boredom only old money can breed, didn't meet his eyes. She cut into a sentence before it ended, dismissive and sharp, then reached over to wipe the touchscreen monitor in front of her with a sanitized cloth. Her motions were deliberate, slow, like she was scrubbing away a stain left behind by his voice. She didn't look at him, didn't apologize, just cleaned. As she finally picked up the ID card, holding it between two fingers like it might leave a residue, she turned to her screen. Her manicured nails tapped the keyboard with exaggerated disinterest. Behind Thurman, a bellman passed by carrying a silver tray piled with cubes of ice wrapped in cloth. As he walked past, he shifted the tray just enough for a handful of ice to tumble and scatter at Thurman's feet. The cold shards slapped against his polished shoes. The bellman didn't stop. Instead, he pointed lazily toward a laminated sign mounted on the pillar. No outside food or beverage permitted in lobby. Then he kept walking. A couple behind Thurman chuckled. Not loud enough to cause a scene, but loud enough to confirm that the moment wasn't private. The receptionist looked up then, just briefly, eyes passing over him like someone glancing at a trash bin to see if it's full. "Nothing's pulling up," she said flatly. He offered his phone, the confirmation email open and ready. She didn't look at it. She simply nodded toward the waiting area and told him someone from management would assist him shortly. No explanation, no effort, just the practiced elegance of exclusion. When he asked again, she repeated the response. Not even annoyed. He didn't matter enough for her to be annoyed. To his left, another guest, a middle-aged white man in a golf vest and loafers, stepped up without waiting. The receptionist's posture straightened, her voice warmed by several degrees, and within seconds, she was handing over a room key wrapped in a silk ribbon. Thurman stood still. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He'd learned long ago that anger made them feel justified. He observed, took mental notes, noticed the whisper between two staffers behind the desk, followed by a glance in his direction, and a smirk they didn't bother hiding. He heard the muted laugh from the concierge nearby, saw the way she avoided his gaze the moment he turned his head. Time passed. Not much. Just enough to say, "You don't matter." He asked to speak with a manager. The receptionist told him none were available at the moment. When he asked what had happened to his reservation, she shrugged and said it must have been canceled automatically. When he asked by whom, she said the system doesn't track that kind of detail. The front doors rotated again. Two younger white guests entered, soaked from the rain, laughing, visibly underdressed for the venue. They were greeted with champagne and a towel. Thurman, still standing near the desk, received another glance from security. Not a threatening one, just watchful, ready, prepared to escort, not to assist. The bellman passed again, this time without ice, but he muttered something under his breath. Back entrances are on 8th. A sentence he didn't need to explain. A sentence he'd heard before. As the air chilled around him despite the hotel's warmth, Thurman reached for his phone. Not to call. Not yet. Just to remind himself of the time. 6 minutes standing still, invisible yet hypervisible. Behind him, the couple from earlier was checking in. They talked about the jazz bar upstairs, about how this was their favorite hotel in the city. The receptionist giggled. He wondered what it took to earn a giggle in this place. Then he remembered it wasn't something you earned. It was something you inherited, something you embodied. The air had thickened now, but not from temperature. It was the slow suffocation of being tolerated just enough to not be removed, but never enough to be welcomed. A man in a navy blazer walked by and cleared his throat audibly, not to get attention. A pair of housekeeping staff moved through the space now, one pushing a linen cart, the other trailing slightly behind, fanning out the air freshener as if cleansing the area of some unseen disturbance. As they approached, the one nearest to Thurman veered sharply, exaggerated in her sidestep, her arm lifting high so her sleeve wouldn't so much as graze his coat. She moved as if brushing past a leaking trash bag. Her expression didn't register shame or awkwardness. It was calculated neutrality, the kind that says this isn't personal, but it absolutely is. Her colleague, shorter and slightly older, glanced sideways at Thurman's posture, then nudged the other with her elbow. They began speaking softly in French Creole, but deliberately slow, ensuring the rhythm of their exchange was comprehensible. Embedded in their casual gossip were words not meant for confusion, but for insult. Familiar slurs veiled under accents, wrapped in false innocence. Thurman understood every word. His jaw tensed, but he didn't move. He stood straighter, refusing to blink, refusing to let the burn of their mockery reach his skin. One of them laughed too loud for the joke to be anything but a performance, then turned her head with a smirk, her eyes locking onto his just long enough to confirm the act had landed. Thurman inhaled slowly, choosing silence over escalation, choosing memory over reaction. He was good at that. A lifetime of being watched, challenged, tested, had taught him when to speak and when to study. This was not his moment to rise, it was theirs to fall. As the staff wheeled away the linen cart, one of them knocked a folded towel off the stack, and instead of retrieving it, she looked at Thurman and said with amused condescension, "Oops," before walking away. The towel sat on the floor between them like a metaphor, a white square abandoned at the feet of a man they wanted gone. Another staff member entered from the back hallway carrying a tray of pastries. She paused mid-step when she saw Thurman, then made a show of turning in a different direction, avoiding the path as if it were blocked by a spill. She whispered something into her earpiece, and a moment later, a tall man in hotel security uniform emerged near the main elevator bank. He didn't approach, just stood with his arms folded, eyes narrowed, pretending to scan the lobby, but never once breaking focus from Thurman. It was clear the message had spread. He was being monitored, not assisted. Behind the concierge desk, a young intern, still in training by the looks of the tag clipped to her blazer, leaned in to speak with the woman Thurman had initially dealt with. The intern whispered something that made the woman roll her eyes and shake her head, before turning and giving Thurman a long, slow glance that landed somewhere between disdain and disbelief. The intern looked uncertain, like she wasn't sure what she had just witnessed, or if she should believe it was normal. The experienced staffer handed her a folder, turned back to her computer, and resumed ignoring his presence. Thurman checked his watch. 17 minutes since he first presented his reservation. Not one sincere offer to help. Not one apology. No effort. No hospitality. Just the same wall of invisible rejection wrapped in smiles too thin to hide what they meant. A corporate executive brushed past Thurman in a rush toward the elevator. He looked at him and did a double take, then muttered under his breath, "Brave of you to loiter here." His tone wasn't accusatory, it was pitying, as if Thurman was too naive to understand that places like this didn't need to say no to say no. The line between entitlement and permission had been drawn long before he walked through the door. The front entrance opened again, and a young woman with a camera crew entered. Thurman recognized her face from a popular travel blog. She was escorted immediately to the concierge, greeted with champagne and a welcome packet. Her entourage laughed, chatted, took selfies by the lobby fireplace. None of them noticed the tall man in the dark wool coat standing stiffly to the side, the only one in the room not offered a single word of greeting. The tall man who had booked a suite just like anyone else. The music playing overhead, light classical piano, danced mockingly in contrast to the tension beneath. It was music for clients, not for men like him. A clipboard was passed between two bellmen. On the paper, highlighted in red, was a handwritten note. From across the room, Thurman couldn't read it, but he didn't have to. The way they passed it off, careful not to make eye contact, told him exactly what it was. An alert, a designation, a target. He turned slightly and caught his own reflection in the brass elevator door. Nothing looked out of place. His posture remained correct, his expression unreadable. But something behind his eyes shifted just slightly. Not rage, not defeat. It was calculation. Then a guest services supervisor walked by, nodded politely to a white couple sitting nearby, then cast a quick glance at Thurman. She didn't stop, didn't ask if he needed assistance. Still, no one addressed him. He remained a silhouette in tailored wool, his posture straight, his presence ignored. It wasn't just coldness anymore, it was protocol, quiet and practiced. A manager emerged from the side hallway, clipboard in hand, shoes clicking sharply against the marble. His expression was composed but alert. His gaze swept the lobby, quickly locating Thurman as if briefed. Instead of approaching with concern or service, he raised a hand toward a nearby staffer and gestured discreetly. The staffer nodded and moved toward Thurman, not to help, but to handle. "Sir," the man began, his voice overly pleasant, "I'll have to ask you to step aside for a moment. We're trying to expedite check-in for our priority guests." Thurman turned his head slightly, slowly. "I've been waiting 25 minutes. My reservation was confirmed 4 days ago." The man didn't blink. "I understand that, but some of our guests are with the Lambert and Diamond Circle. We have a system in place for rapid processing. We appreciate your patience." Behind him, a man in a burgundy three-piece suit and mirror-shined loafers stood, checking his watch. The staffer gestured for Thurman to move. "Just this way, sir." Without argument, Thurman stepped aside, not out of compliance, but out of calculation. He stood by the edge of the reception queue, now further from resolution than when he arrived. The man in the burgundy suit was ushered forward, offered a hot towel and glass of cucumber water. The words "Welcome back, Mr. Hutchins" were spoken with warm familiarity. 2 steps behind, a uniformed hostess moved through the line, distributing welcome kits, small leather boxes embossed with the Lamberton crest, each containing a scented candle, luggage tag, and a voucher for a free massage. She handed one to the man behind Thurman, a retiree in a casual blazer. Then another to a young couple wearing matching monogram travel gear. When she reached Thurman, she paused, her smile faltering. She glanced at the small stack of remaining kits in her basket, then back at him. "We've just run out," she said softly, almost apologetically, then turned away before he could respond. Seconds later, she handed the last kit to a teenage boy whose mother whispered something in his ear as he accepted it with an annoyed shrug. The boy looked over his shoulder at Thurman, then away, uninterested. Thurman didn't react, but he felt the weight of it, sharp and measured. It wasn't just what they said. It was how little effort they made to pretend he mattered. The bellhop who had laughed earlier now stood beside the elevator bank, chatting with a guest about the jazz club on the top floor. His voice was animated, full of charm. But as Thurman's gaze lingered, the bellhop caught his eye, and for a brief second, his mask dropped. He gave a knowing smirk, subtle and cruel, before turning back to the conversation. Further down the lobby, A tray of complimentary pastries and espresso shots was being passed among the incoming guests. A tall woman in a navy pantsuit received her cup with gratitude, the barista smiling as he poured steamed milk into a leaf shape on the foam. Thurman watched as the barista came closer, tray balanced expertly. But when he reached him, the tray tilted away and the barista turned, offering the last espresso to a man who had just entered behind him. "Sorry man, this one's reserved," the barista muttered, barely audible. Thurman didn't respond. The tray moved on, the scent of coffee lingering like a reminder of something just out of reach. A concierge assistant, new, nervous, young, stepped toward him with an iPad in hand. She looked as though she was about to speak, but then hesitated. From across the room, the receptionist who had initially dismissed him gave a sharp shake of her head. The assistant veered off without a word. Thurman exhaled slowly. He could feel it, the pattern, the choreography. Every rejection was rehearsed, every slight wrapped in procedure. They hadn't decided to mistreat him on a whim. They had a script, a protocol. His presence wasn't just unexpected, it was unpermitted. An elderly guest walked by and adjusted his scarf, muttering to his wife, "Strange how some people just stand there, as if they belong." The wife didn't respond. Her eyes followed Thurman for another second before drifting back to her phone. Another manager exited the elevator, flanked by a valet and another staffer. They passed by Thurman as if he were invisible. Behind the desk, a printer churned out new room slips, keys snapped into paper envelopes. Hands moved with mechanical precision, but none of them moved toward him. A couple walked past, admiring the flower arrangements, taking selfies beneath the chandelier. The woman leaned close to her partner and whispered, "He's still there," with a laugh that was softer than shame. Thurman rolled his shoulder once, loosening the tension there, but his spine never bent. His hands remained calm at his sides. He looked around not with desperation, but with a gaze that registered every offense and filed it away. He was documenting it all, internally, precisely. The marble lobby floor reflected everything, except him. It seemed even the architecture refused to acknowledge his place in the scene. Thurman didn't argue. He simply took the card and nodded. The path toward the elevators had cleared, and the bellhop who had earlier grinned at him now stepped forward with a stiff, overly formal posture, insisting on escorting him upstairs. Thurman followed in silence, the wheels of his carry-on gliding across marble that reflected light more generously than it reflected his presence. Inside the elevator, the bellhop avoided conversation but stole glances at Thurman through the mirror panel, as though trying to solve a puzzle that didn't belong in the building. The doors opened on the 32nd floor. The hallway was quiet, perfumed with citrus and linen, the kind of scent meant to impress investors and quiet complaints. As they walked, Thurman noticed something peculiar. The air freshener vents along the corridor seemed to activate as he passed, releasing short bursts of chemical fragrance directly behind him. At first, it was subtle, then deliberate. With each step, another burst. The bellhop said nothing, but his tightened jaw and quickened pace betrayed the awkwardness. When they reached the suite, he opened the door, announced the room number without enthusiasm, and left abruptly. The door closed behind him, and Thurman exhaled into the stillness. The suite was immaculate, but hollow. Leather chairs, glass desk, floor-to-ceiling windows with skyline views. It was the illusion of welcome. He placed his suitcase in the closet, then sat down at the dining table, trying to shake the lingering scent of artificial citrus that now clung to the fabric of his coat. 20 minutes passed. He needed to eat. The in-room dining menu listed a rooftop restaurant exclusive to guests in executive suites. It offered a view, privacy, and according to the brochure, world-class service. He made his way back to the elevator and pressed the rooftop level. When the doors opened again, he was greeted not by a host, but by two waitstaff preparing the final touches before lunch service began. One looked up, startled, then quickly masked it with a smile. She approached him with the strained warmth of someone forced into polite duty. "Welcome, sir. Do you have a reservation?" Thurman nodded and gave his name. The hostess tapped the tablet, found his suite listed, then paused for a moment too long before waving him in. Right this way. The rooftop was mostly empty, with only a few tables already set for midday service. White linens embroidered with a Lamberton crest adorned every table. Crystal water glasses stood to the right of polished silverware. A breeze fluttered the curtains framing the edge of the patio. She led him to a table near the corner, close to the door, not near the glass rail where other guests would enjoy unobstructed views. As he sat, he noticed something immediately. His tablecloth was not like the others. It was darker, a deep slate gray with no embroidery, the fabric thicker, almost coarser. The centerpiece was a simple candle in a frosted jar, unlike the fresh orchids placed on every other table. He glanced around, confirming the detail. The pattern was not random. This was designation by subtle deviation. The server approached without welcome. She poured water without offering a menu. When he requested one, she returned with a laminated version missing several pages, as if it had been scavenged from a back drawer. The water she served came without lemon. When he requested it, she replied too quickly, "We're out," then turned before he could speak further. At the adjacent table, a family of 3 received full brunch service, fresh orange juice, imported tea, monogrammed napkins. A waiter stood nearby, explaining the chef's daily specials. One of them laughed loudly, and for a moment, all heads turned toward their joy. No one looked at Thurman. He sat with his back straight, hands resting atop the table, the dark linen now itching against his wrists. The server returned with a small bread basket, 2 cold rolls, no butter. When she placed it down, her fingers hovered just enough to avoid contact. Her smile never reached her eyes. The air freshener vents activated again behind him. A new guest entered the rooftop space, and immediately the staff straightened. He was greeted by name, led to the prime corner table overlooking the lake, and presented with a warm towel scented with eucalyptus. Thurman continued watching, observing. A man at another table received a bottle of red wine he hadn't ordered, a surprise courtesy from the house. Thurman's table remained bare, unadorned. After placing his order, he waited 35 minutes for a sandwich that arrived lukewarm, the plate missing garnish. When he inquired, the waitress simply said, "That's how the chef prepared it," then left without waiting for further comment. He could see people living unbothered lives, unaware that just 32 stories above them, dignity was being dissected one calculated insult at a time. The cloth napkin from the rooftop meal still lay in his hand, dark, rough, stripped of any identity, and he placed it on the desk like evidence. He sat and opened his laptop, intending to focus on the work that had brought him here in the first place, but his inbox was already beginning to fill with silence. The client who had confirmed a meeting that morning had now gone quiet. The assistant who promised to send follow-up materials had missed 2 deadlines. A vague email from the hotel's executive services team read like a scripted deflection. "We hope your stay continues to meet expectations. Should you require additional accommodations, kindly contact the concierge." It was a message devoid of accountability, a velvet refusal to acknowledge what was unfolding floor by floor. Just as he reached to close the lid, a soft knock echoed through the room. Housekeeping, or so he assumed. When he opened the door, a young staffer stood holding a tray with a porcelain coffee cup and a magazine tucked neatly under it. The tray was too refined for an unsolicited delivery, and yet the staffer simply said, "A courtesy refreshment, sir," then turned and left without waiting for acknowledgement. Thurman placed the tray on the desk and looked at the cup. Black coffee, lukewarm, no sugar, no cream. But it was the magazine beneath that arrested his attention. It wasn't the hotel's usual glossy tourism guide. It was a wrinkled copy of a 10-year-old issue of a National Crime Digest, its cover story splashed in red. Urban Violence Surge, the truth about America's inner cities. The image showed a young black man being arrested, handcuffed, blood on his shirt, eyes wide with fear. Thurman stared at the cover for several seconds. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't random. Someone had picked this specific edition from wherever it had been collecting dust and hand-delivered it to his room. Someone had thought this was clever, subtle, maybe even funny. The cup of coffee steamed faintly in the air between them like a smoke signal from a battlefield. Thurman didn't touch it. He picked up the magazine and placed it inside the minibar fridge gently, as though it might contaminate the rest of the room. Then he stood, buttoned his coat, and left the suite. The hallway outside was quiet. The elevator lights blinked softly, a mechanical heartbeat in polished brass. Thurman pressed the call button. Nothing. The screen displayed temporarily out of service. He pressed again. Still nothing. From behind him, a soft cough. Two staffers rounded the corner, one carrying a clipboard, the other a walkie-talkie. Just routine maintenance, one said as they passed, barely glancing his way. Thurman turned, walked to the stairwell, and descended. 32 flights. No explanation. No apology. Just tired knees and smirks he hadn't asked to see. He arrived in the lobby winded but composed. The marble floor still gleamed. The concierge still smiled for everyone else. Near the lounge, a woman with a corporate badge laughed into her phone. Behind the reception desk, two more employees whispered. One pointed casually toward the security monitor and made a vague gesture as if describing someone difficult. The other followed her line of sight. Both laughed. Thurman didn't need to see the screen to know. He knew. The camera at the elevator bank had caught him walking back to his room the night before, tired, quiet, alone. It had caught him again that morning when he stood silently by the desk. Again when he was moved aside. Again when the towel dropped. Again when the gift box skipped his hands. Every moment captured. Every angle reviewed. Perhaps there was even a nickname now. A label in a chat group. He imagined it. 32, too quiet to be rich. Marble shadow. Wrong guest. He wouldn't be surprised. A few guests walked by with lanyards and welcome packets. A conference was in progress on the second floor, and name tags glinted with corporate pride. Thurman tried to enter the elevator again. Still locked. Please use the stairs during this maintenance period. Read a handwritten sign taped to the button panel. No timeline. No technician. Just a barrier. Two guests stepped behind him and pushed the button anyway. The doors opened. They stepped in without pause. Thurman stared at the open doors for a full 3 seconds. When he stepped forward, the staffer who had just finished placing the sign nearby moved to block the path. Sorry, sir. Elevators restricted at the moment. It just opened for them. They're with the conference. So am I. He left his room for the breakfast lounge with a firm stride, still determined to hold on to the veneer of control. The elevator was working this time, but only after 3 different staff members stepped in and out before acknowledging the button he had already pressed. Inside, the air smelled of perfume and disinfectant, a combination he had come to associate with strategic avoidance. The lounge on the mezzanine level was already half-filled, the low hum of cutlery and soft music setting a deceptive calm. He approached the host station and waited. No one came. He waited again. Still nothing. He cleared his throat gently, not to draw attention, but simply because the silence had become too loud. A young woman finally emerged from the side door, holding a tablet and a stack of menus. She glanced at him with a flicker of recognition, but instead of welcoming him, she turned toward a party of 3 that had just entered behind him, escorting them to a window seat and offering them fresh orange juice before they even sat down. After another 5 minutes, Thurman stepped forward and asked if there was seating available. She didn't meet his eyes when she nodded and waved him toward a table in the far corner of the room, near the service hallway, far from the natural light. The table had no setup, no utensils, no napkins, no water. When he sat down, he noticed the faint stickiness of the surface, a sign that it hadn't been properly cleaned from the last guest. Still, he waited. A different server arrived eventually, dropped a menu onto the table without speaking, and walked away before he could even request coffee. The menu was damp, its edges frayed. He wiped his fingers on his pant leg and scanned the options. 30 minutes passed. No one returned. Guests who had arrived after him were already being served. Dishes came and went. Laughter rang out. A waiter passed his table 3 times without stopping. When Thurman finally caught his attention and asked if he could place an order, the waiter replied curtly, "We're running behind," and disappeared into the kitchen. Another 10 minutes passed. Then, at last, the waiter returned, standing just far enough to make it clear he was in a hurry. Thurman gave his order plainly, succinctly. No substitutions. No adjustments. Just a simple request. The waiter scribbled something on his notepad, without speaking, and turned away. From his seat, Thurman could see him walk to the counter and drop the ticket into a small trash bin beneath the host stand. The gesture wasn't hidden. It was performed, deliberate, slow, undeniable. Thurman watched. He didn't rise. He didn't call out. He sat in stillness as another server approached with a tray of croissants for a couple seated nearby, offering them with a bow and a flourish, as if bestowing a gift. When he asked for a napkin, a third staffer appeared, one he hadn't seen before, a young woman with sharp cheekbones and eyes dulled by repetition. She carried a stack of folded cloths and walked toward him with heavy steps. Instead of handing the napkin to him directly, she tossed it lightly onto the ground beside his chair, then raised an eyebrow, pointed to it, and said flatly, "There you go." He stared at her. She didn't flinch. She turned and walked away. The napkin sat on the floor like a dare, a challenge, a line drawn with linen. He reached down, picked it up carefully, shook off the dust, and placed it on his lap. No one offered water. No one offered explanation. No one cared. A few seats away, a family finished their breakfast and requested their check. The father smiled at the staff, shook hands with the manager. The manager laughed, waved, and turned directly toward Thurman as he passed. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He only looked. The same look that everyone in the building had given him since he arrived. The look of someone trying to erase you without touching you. A low murmur spread through the room as more guests arrived. One of them pointed discreetly toward Thurman's table. Another giggled into her mimosa. The waiter returned to refill coffee at nearby tables, but skipped his without pause. The music overhead shifted to a brighter melody, some classical fusion, the kind played to elevate mood while diminishing tension. It didn't work. The tension had settled into the walls. It had rooted itself in the upholstery, the silverware, the air vents. Thurman checked his watch. Nearly an hour. Still no food. Still no drink. Still no acknowledgement. He stood slowly, brushed the front of his coat, and walked to the exit. No one stopped him. No one asked if something was wrong. The lobby remained busy with polite chaos, full of travelers exchanging smiles and keycards, unaware that a single man, quiet and unmoved, was about to shift the foundation beneath them. He paused by the concierge desk, not to ask for help, but to look once more at the woman who had denied him service with a smile just days before. She noticed him, but quickly glanced away, her lips pressing thin, as if his presence remained an inconvenience. At that moment, the doors of the hotel rotated open with a slow, practiced sweep. The doormen stiffened. The bellhops straightened their posture. From the outside stepped 6 figures dressed in black tailored suits, each of them walking with the coordination and calm of people who never needed to explain their authority. At their center was a man with steel-gray temples and a tablet pressed firmly against his chest. He scanned the room once, nodded to his team, and approached Thurman directly. As they reached him, the man in front lowered his voice and bent at the waist slightly, not out of courtesy, but out of structure. "Sir," he said without hesitation, "the board is awaiting your instruction. All channels are standing by." Thurman didn't blink. He pulled his phone from his coat pocket, opened an encrypted communication app, and tapped a single button labeled Deploy. The message was brief, precise, and irreversible. Suspend all partner operations with Lambert & Global. Indefinite freeze. Immediate enforcement. The screen pulsed once with a confirmation. The man with the gray temples received a ping on his tablet almost simultaneously. He glanced down, read the confirmation, and gave the smallest nod. "We'll begin the cascade now," he said. "You should see the effects within minutes." Around them, the lobby continued to move in ignorant harmony. A jazz trio was setting up in the corner. 2 influencers posed beneath the chandelier. A honeymoon couple was checking in, their bags full of expectations and linen shirts. None of them had any idea that the building they stood in had just become a sinking vessel. Thurman turned without a word and began walking toward the exit. As he did, one of the staffers behind the desk noticed the group in black moving like a wave through the lobby. She leaned toward the manager beside her and whispered something, eyebrows raised in confusion. The manager stood to his full height and approached cautiously, trying to gauge the disruption. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, speaking not to Thurman, but to the man with the tablet. The man in black did not respond. Instead, he turned to a colleague, who had just received another notification. "Distribution nodes locked," the colleague said. "Hotel chain servers blacklisted. Package rates withdrawn from all partner APIs. Loyalty points platform terminated." The manager blinked. "Excuse me, what are you saying?" The lead operative responded calmly. "Your parent brand has just been removed from our infrastructure. All reservation functionality is offline. Payment networks linked to your reward system are being dissolved. Group travel agreements have been nullified. You may want to alert your legal counsel." Behind them, the receptionist dropped a phone mid-conversation. The guest she had been speaking with looked up in surprise. "Everything okay?" he asked. She didn't respond. Her eyes were glued to her screen, where the reservation interface had just crashed with a line of red text reading access denied. Thurman kept walking. The scent of the hotel, once sweet, once clinical, was now sour with the heat of confusion. Phones began to ring behind the front desk. Staff scrambled to answer. One of the assistant managers shouted toward the back office. The elevator stuttered, and a bellhop's handheld terminal buzzed and shut down mid-check-in. In the corner, the jazz trio had stopped tuning their instruments. A silence spread that had nothing to do with music. Guests began to murmur. "Why is my room not showing up in the system? The website just went down. My confirmation email is gone." The operations manager pushed through the crowd, waving his tablet. "What's happening? Who are these people?" The man in black turned to him and replied without emotion. "We're the infrastructure your hotel depends on, or rather, used to." Behind the manager, a marketing rep from the corporate office appeared on a video call with panic in her voice. "We're being delisted. Google's wiping our visibility. Trip sites are blocking our chain. Is this some kind of breach?" The man in black handed her a code. "That's the termination reference. You can check the compliance trail." The lobby erupted into fractured chaos, half confusion, half disbelief. Staff barked orders. Guests demanded answers. Security stood useless, unsure if what they were witnessing was a corporate glitch or the end of their careers. No one had noticed that the man who triggered it all had walked to the curb outside. Thurman stood by a waiting car, the driver already out, door open. Across the street, a digital billboard that once advertised the Lamberton now flashed a blank gray screen. The executive assistant's voice came softly through the car's comm system, reading the reports in sequence with the precision of someone trained not just to deliver news, but to understand its weight. Nexus Travel Platform has disengaged all property listings related to Lamberton Global, she said. 4 major booking engines have mirrored the disconnect. Travel aggregators in Asia, Europe, and the Middle East are issuing global advisories. The blackout is holding at 97% reach and climbing. Thurman didn't respond. He simply looked out the window as the facade of the hotel began to crumble, not in structure, but in meaning. On the screens inside lobbies across continents, the proud logo of the Lamberton brand blinked off one by one, replaced by a neutral placeholder. This listing is currently unavailable. Partner hotels who relied on shared loyalty points watched helplessly as their benefits vanished. The loyalty app itself crashed within 38 minutes of the initial command, wiped of its architecture from the inside. There was no virus, no hacking, just permission revoked. At the same time, in a co-working space in San Francisco, a junior data analyst looked up from his dashboard and whispered, "Something's wrong. The API hooks are vanishing." His manager stared at the map filling with red indicators, trying to process what they were seeing. The system didn't crash, it obeyed. Every partner system had been built with Thurman's infrastructure. Every server, every gateway, every handshake of digital trust had originated from his design. No one saw it coming, because no one believed someone who looked like him could be the architect of their foundation. The internet caught on within the hour. Screenshots surfaced on travel forums, blank reservation pages, frozen booking carts, error messages in 5 languages. Guests trapped in lobbies with bags and no confirmation codes. Tweets began stacking under a single trending tag. #Lamberton shutdown. One user posted a photo from inside the same Chicago hotel Thurman had just left. The front desk staff stood frozen, surrounded by irate customers demanding answers. The caption read, "Systems down. No bookings." Staff's clueless. Something big's happening. 10 minutes later, someone posted a clip from the previous day, blurry but unmistakable, showing Thurman standing silently near the front desk, being waved aside by staff, ignored, passed over for a white guest. The caption was more direct. Guess who they just kicked out? Turns out, he owns the pipeline. A blogger with 1 million followers picked it up. Then a business influencer on LinkedIn. Then a verified journalist with ties to travel industry regulation posted a short thread titled "The Man Who Turned Off the Sky." Newsrooms scrambled. Within 40 minutes, every major outlet from CNN to Bloomberg had dispatched teams to verify the emerging storm. By the time Thurman's car reached the executive terminal of a private airstrip just outside the city, 3 drones were already circling overhead. Inside the terminal, staff stood with guarded expressions, not quite sure if they were witnessing an arrival or an investigation. But they had received the alert. Priority 1 asset. No interference. Thurman exited the car without fanfare, his coat still bearing the faint smell of hotel cleaner and synthetic citrus. His presence didn't shout. It didn't need to. It carried weight because the world had finally shifted to see him through the correct lens. The man who had once stood beside a reception desk, invisible and insulted, now stood at the center of a geopolitical ripple that was shaking the industry. As he walked toward the private jet, the tarmac crew didn't bow or applaud. They simply cleared the way. Because recognition, when rooted in power, didn't need noise. Back in the city, a senior vice president of global partnerships was slumped over her laptop in the Lamberton corporate tower, staring at a spreadsheet that now read like a terminal diagnosis. "We've lost half the Pacific bookings," she muttered, voice dry. "Europe's dropping us. LATAM's next." Her assistant, pale with disbelief, whispered, "Why would he do this? Over a check-in error?" The VP didn't answer. She was already looking up his name. And when the LinkedIn page finally loaded, her breath caught. Chairman, founder, majority stakeholder of Straightline Systems, the most widely used cloud infrastructure in global travel commerce. The man they refused a napkin had written the code that gave them airspace in the first place. Calls were made to boardrooms in London, to crisis teams in Berlin, to compliance lawyers in Dubai. But none of them could undo what had already been done, because the servers didn't fail. They obeyed, and what they obeyed was not a system flaw. By the time the sun rose over the Lamberton flagship tower in Manhattan, the brand had entered free fall. Thurman, meanwhile, remained absent from the noise, flying above it, literally and figuratively, while the consequences he had set in motion spread through the machinery of privilege like fire through dry timber. At headquarters, the morning meeting opened not with coffee, but crisis. The director of brand trust had resigned by 7:15 a.m., citing irreconcilable internal failures. By 8 a.m., 3 more executives followed. Each gave variations of the same explanation. They had not been consulted, they had not been aware, they would not be held responsible. But the truth was simpler. They had seen the footage, they had seen the names, they had recognized the magnitude, and they wanted off a ship that had struck its iceberg in full view of the public. At the Chicago property, the very hotel where it all began, the mood was not panic, but paralysis. The general manager, a man who had once told his staff to trust your instincts about certain guests, had been summoned to an unscheduled meeting at 2 a.m. and removed from his position before sunrise. The reason given was failure to de-escalate a high-impact interaction. But the real reason echoed in every floorboard. They had humiliated the wrong man. The front office staff who had dismissed Thurman, redirected him, ignored his credentials, and sneered behind the desk were placed on indefinite leave. Official memos cited procedural review. Off the record, they were told not to return until further notice. HR teams descended like vultures wrapped in tailored suits, conducting interviews not for truth but for optics. Who knew? Who heard? Who failed to step in? Surveillance footage was reviewed with the intensity of a legal thriller, frame by frame, angle by angle. Expressions paused and examined for motive. But it was too late. The public had already made its verdict. Social media had turned Lamberton into a meme overnight. A meme not of ridicule, but of reckoning. Images of their polished logo were edited into broken windows. Review sites flooded with one-star comments not from actual guests, but from thousands protesting injustice. The phrase "do not disturb, do not discriminate" began trending as a campaign. Influencers distanced themselves. Travel bloggers posted apology videos, forever endorsing the brand. A fashion house canceled a planned ad shoot at one of the chain's resorts. Airlines removed bundled packages that included Lamberton accommodations. But worse than the PR disaster was the financial hemorrhaging that followed. Within 24 hours, 14 major investors issued withdrawal notices from Lamberton Group Holdings. 3 hedge funds liquidated their shares entirely. On the New York Stock Exchange, LMG stock plunged 27% by the end of the day and another 11% in after-hours trading. Financial analysts who had once called the chain a stable hospitality giant now revised their outlooks to high risk. The chairman of Lamberton's board, a man who had spent decades building the chain from regional relevance to international recognition, faced calls for resignation during a live shareholder call. One shareholder, dialed in from Dubai, didn't mince words. "You built a company that could be undone by one man," he said. "That tells me your foundation was never real." In response, the chairman offered prepared statements. He spoke of commitment to values, of diversity audits, of internal policy changes. But no one was listening. Screens across investor terminals flashed crimson, with numbers tumbling into the abyss. By afternoon, the chairman's public calendar was cleared. His executive assistant stopped answering emails. The media caught wind of a closed-door meeting rumored to be the beginning of succession planning. Meanwhile, the legal department faced a new flood. Civil rights organizations announced class action filings. Former employees who had faced discrimination came forward, emboldened by Thurman's story. A former desk clerk in Atlanta revealed she had been reprimanded for making certain guests feel too comfortable. Another from the San Diego branch released emails that showed how guest profiles were flagged with racial codes masked as security risk levels. None of these scandals surprised Thurman. He had seen the rot from the moment he entered the lobby. He had smelled it in the air freshener that followed only him, felt it in the weight of the napkin thrown to the ground, heard it in the silence that surrounded every request he made. The destruction was not vengeance. It was correction. It was justice rendered through architecture, not emotion. In London, a journalist concluded her op-ed with a line that went viral by evening. They thought they were protecting luxury from disruption. What they didn't know was that disruption wore a tailored coat and carried receipts. Days had passed since the collapse, but the tremors still lingered in boardrooms and break rooms, in group chats left silent and reputations left charred. While the corporate architects scrambled to salvage contracts and recover face, while news anchors repeated the same words in different tones. Historic, irreversible, deserved. Thurman had moved on. He had returned to his foundation, not metaphorically, but literally. A converted warehouse in the heart of the South Side, now a thriving community center bearing no plaque, no ego, just purpose. It was a place of computers instead of gossip, of job training instead of judgment, of eye contact instead of performance. The center had grown quietly over the years, tucked between forgotten neighborhoods and overlooked blocks, exactly where it was needed. Thurman arrived without security, without noise. He was known here not as a CEO or a code writer or a ghost in luxury spaces, but as the man who showed up. He donated laptops without ceremony, built curriculum without headlines, and when he walked the halls, the kids greeted him like an uncle, not a savior. That morning, as he entered through the back door with a carton of art supplies under one arm, a familiar voice called his name, soft, nervous, and unexpected. He turned to see a young man standing at the edge of the hall, out of place in posture and energy. The man was dressed in clothes too formal for this part of town, his eyes unsure, his hands clutched together in the kind of tension that usually came before confession. Thurman recognized him. He had once worked at the hotel, a bellhop, one who had laughed, one who had turned away. The man took a hesitant step forward, then another, until he stood directly before Thurman, the hallway shrinking between them. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then suddenly his words stumbled out, not practiced, not clean, but raw. He said he had seen the footage, the stories, the truth. He said he hadn't known. He said he had followed the cues of others, mimicked the tone, joined the game without knowing the stakes. He said he hadn't thought it mattered. He said he had been wrong. The words tumbled, some choked, some whispered. And when he could no longer form them, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, crumpled envelope. Inside it, a simple request. He wanted to volunteer. He wanted to serve, not to make amends, not to beg forgiveness, but because the shame wouldn't go away unless it was transformed. Thurman said nothing, not at first. He watched the man, watched the posture of regret, the stillness of someone realizing too late that silence had consequences. Then he turned, walked into a nearby office, and returned with a folder. Inside were forms, basic, procedural, nothing special. But on top of the stack, in bold print, was a single sentence. From this moment forward, your choices contribute to the justice you once ignored. He handed the folder to the man and walked past him without another word. The man stood there, eyes burning, gripping the paper like a second chance. That afternoon, he cleaned classrooms and sorted supplies in silence. He stayed after hours without being asked. He returned the next day, and the day after that. He never asked for credit. He never asked to speak. But slowly, piece by piece, he began to rebuild himself in the quiet. Thurman never mentioned the hotel again. He never referred to the chain, the scandal, the downfall. He didn't need to. Others did that for him, journalists, lawyers, professors, activists. The headlines continued for weeks, then months. Investigations bloomed. Policies changed. Conferences were canceled. But Thurman did not attend the panels. He did not accept the awards. When asked for comment, his office simply replied, "Mr. Foster is unavailable. He is at work." In private, he wrote a final memorandum, not for revenge, but for record. It outlined a new initiative, a leadership fellowship for former hospitality employees seeking to build inclusive service spaces. No interviews, no marketing, just action. It launched quietly, filled instantly, and grew steadily. Back at the center, one of the kids asked him one day why he had let them get away with it for so long, why he had taken it, why he hadn't shouted. Thurman smiled gently, not with satisfaction, but with understanding. "Because sometimes silence isn't surrender," he said. "It's precision." The boy blinked, confused. "What's precision?" Thurman bent down, looked him in the eye, and said, "It's what you use when you build something no one thinks you're capable of." That night, as lights flickered off across the center and street lamps buzzed to life outside, Thurman stood alone in his office, staring at the framed blueprint of the first server he ever designed. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't sleek. But it had worked. It had held. And now so had he. Far above the city, in a glass tower whose logo had recently been removed, a new management team reviewed plans for cultural sensitivity training, revised uniforms, redesigned guest protocols. But their budget was slashed, their reputation scorched, and their leadership under federal review. Meanwhile, in the south side of Chicago, a boy finished coding his first app in a corner lab named after no one, under a sign that read, "You belong here." The end. If this story made you think twice about justice, dignity, or the power of staying silent until the right moment, consider subscribing for more. We create powerful, thought-provoking narratives that leave a lasting impact. Which moment hit you the hardest? Was it the quiet humiliation or the final reckoning? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your take.